Hey, Ken, thanks for joining.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We had a rocky start, but we're getting through the tech stuff. It's very normal. It's all good.
Reality in our new remotely connected world.
Yes, but you're over there getting like the Mac gear, working with the PC and all the things. It's like it's a setup, Whereas I just have mine like set all the time, and I just don't leave my desk. I like just set it and forget it.
I leave my desk 15, 20 times a day. I'm working everywhere. So. Hey, but we made it work, so that's good.
We got through it. Yeah. Thanks for jumping on. You get to work in a fun space that, we were joking, there's 4 of you in the world, but I know that's not true. But there's not a lot of stewardship pastors or stewardship ministers in the church, at large. So I love talking to folks like you who are, working in ministry, but also focused on kind of the, not just like raising money, but helping people with their connection to money and spirituality and their relationship with God and kind of how all those things kind of work together. So yeah, I'd love to just hear more about your journey into ministry and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Well, I grew up pretty, I think the word for it, we have a new word for it. The word used to be poor. And I grew up in a Christian household, and I always had this tension between not wanting to be poor, which is a polite way of saying I wanted to be rich.
Right.
But I also wanted to be godly. And so the spiritual tension that exists between those two things is very real. Jesus talked about it a lot. Mm-hmm. And I had a great plan to be rich, or at least I thought I did. I didn't have a great plan to be godly with my money. And through a series of circumstances, I was challenged in that. I built a reasonably successful company as kind of a bivocational minister. I was in Miami for 29 years, and most of that time worked with multicultural bilingual ministry. But along the way, as I was doing that, I built this company that was pretty successful. I sold it in 2011 and fell over backwards into a job as a stewardship pastor at the church I was a member there. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Right.
So, and I had done a little bit of training, and they said, well, we'll give you a desk in an office, go. And that's kind of where I learned church. So I did a lot of small church. I did some big church. When I left that job, I went to go work for Ramsey Solutions. I sold financial peace, their church-wide financial peace, but to big churches.
Right.
I left that job in early 2021 and took the role as the stewardship minister at Brentwood Baptist, where I was already a member.
Yeah.
And I, at the same time, said, I really like working with more than one church. So you'll also find my bio on the team page for Generis, which does campaign consulting, generosity development, coaching. So I kind of move in and out of a few different worlds, but it's all, my lane is pure generosity stewardship.
That's right. Yeah, I happen to know Jim and Brad pretty well. So. Mm-hmm. I think Brad is kind of doing some other things now, but good guys. Generis does fantastic work. So that's cool that you're connected over there and kind of serving that way too.
Yeah.
Going all the way back to the first job in ministry, did you call it a stewardship pastor, or did you even know, how did you?
When we started it was kind of one of these situations where I was standing around, there was a desk, there was an executive pastor who gave me a shot, and nobody really knew what we wanted out of the job. And that's one of the really interesting things about stewardship. And so they didn't actually call me a stewardship pastor for a while. And I actually remember the first time I said that, they made me a signatory on the church bank account. And I gave that. I'm like, no, that actually sounds like it. That sounds like it fits. In this role, people have different expectations around it. A congregational member that you're dealing with might have an expectation that you're going to hit them up for money. A pastor might have an expectation that you're going to raise money. Somebody in the discipleship team might expect you to have more of a focus on next steps of obedience. So saying you're a stewardship pastor is pretty broad stroke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What? Okay, so you're in this role now at Brentwood. Like, what does the role look like? Like, if somebody's listening in and they're like, Stewardship Pastor, I've heard of it. Maybe I'm not super familiar. What are the primary like responsibilities of a stewardship pastor in your current role? Because like you said, it could be different at every church.
In this role, shortly after I started in the role, we launched a pretty large capital campaign. So that was kind of mission one. And that's a big deal. And so in a complex staff, those are your listeners that are on large staff teams, like sometimes you just need somebody to hold up the banner and the flag and say, hey, don't forget stewardship.
Right.
And my role is more complex and involved in that. But a lot of times I'm in a meeting, I just say, hey, by the way, don't forget this. We're doing a capital campaign. Our messaging needs to reflect that. So it's about the first half of this year. Actually, a great deal of 2022. And in 2023, what I'm mostly looking forward to doing is equipping staff at our various campuses. We have 8 currently. It's about to be 9. To have stewardship conversations with the people that they serve. I want to normalize the giving conversation. I want to help our staff and our people understand that giving is not about money that we need to do ministry, although that's a result of giving. Stewardship is about obedience to God. Generosity changes you, and you will hit a roadblock in your Christian life if you refuse to be obedient with your finances.
Right. Yeah. I mean, talking about money is hard for a lot of pastors.
It is, and I have theories about why that's so.
Please, why do you think? Because it's like Tithely is a generosity company in its roots. We kind of do a lot now, but we get it. Like pastors, in a lot of ways, like talking about money is hard. And I've been a youth pastor. I've never been a senior pastor, so I don't really get it. But I can appreciate like talking about money when you're paid by the church and kind of the dynamics around that, especially maybe at a smaller church. Like, I get it. Like, it's a kind of a hard tension to deal with, but I would love your perspective on why pastors struggle with that.
I think you hit one of the biggest tensions, which is pastors are worried that when they speak about money, it's going to sound self-serving. So I actually had a pastor a few weeks ago. I said, hey, do you struggle with this conversation? He said, yes. And I said, why? And he said, when I talk about money, I feel like a used car salesman. That was his phrase.
Right.
This is a very mature man of God whom I have a tremendous amount of respect for. So I think there's a sense in which pastors worry that they will be perceived as self-serving.
Yeah.
I think that many pastors, more than we might think, actually struggle with money on themselves. They manage it poorly. Many pastors fail to tithe, which makes it very hard to speak about tithing from a position of authority or credibility.
Yeah.
Right. And so
that's true of everything, right? I guess it's hard to call other people to some standard if you're not living it yourself. That's a really hard thing to do. That pastors do all the time in all kinds of ways, right? Because they're calling us to God's standard, not your own. But I get it. It's still a hard thing to do.
And if you take those two things as an extreme, like let's say that on the one hand is somebody who's just afraid how he's going to be perceived, and on the other extreme is someone who struggles. Between those, what you find is that there's a very real spiritual dynamic around money. Like, it's hard to know your own motivations about money. We know from scripture that our hearts can deceive us. We can't even know our own hearts.
Right.
And that's true when it comes to money. If you're going to ask somebody to be generous, as a pastor, if your challenge to somebody is to live a generous life, whatever it is you believe about generosity or tithing 10% to the church, gross or net, but if you want that person to be generous, it needs to be okay if some of that generosity doesn't accrue to you. And understanding that tension within our own hearts, being honest with ourselves about our motivations and our expectations,
right,
takes a tremendous amount of maturity.
Right.
So it's easier to do just about anything else.
It's easier to just not talk about it. And then
it's easier to not talk about it because it's if I can teach somebody theological truth, some other obscure theological truth, maybe where the next steps are more clear or less personal, that makes it easier on me. It makes it easier on both of us.
Right.
But it doesn't necessarily help that person grow.
Right. How do you help pastors through this? Like, how are you comfortable with it? And then how do you help other pastors, overcome this or get better at it?
I try to, it's a good question. And It's a skill I'm always working on. The first thing is I just acknowledge that there's differences in personality styles. I'm not a big personality profile guy, but on the Enneagram, I'm an 8 with no wing, which I think means I just like challenging people all the time. So aggravating people is a spiritual gift in my
Right.
world.
Yeah, absolutely.
But here's what I'd say. I bring pastors to scripture, and I actually ask them a series of questions. I'll say, hey, tell me what it is you want for your people in the area of stewardship. And a lot of times pastors have never thought about that in those terms. Yeah. And then I'll bring them to a series of scripture passages. One of my favorites is Mark 4, which is the parable of the sower, where we find that the difference between a mature, fully formed follower of Christ and someone who's only a marginal believer is largely how they treat and manage their material possessions and what they believe and do with money, believe about and do with money. So when you start to look at things theologically, it's hard for a pastor to argue. Getting them to go from the place of intellectual assent to an actual action, that's a little more difficult.
Right. Yeah. No, I love it. So, I mean, you do this, you're in this role at your church. What is the day-to-day, week to week, like what does it look like as a stewardship pastor?
Well, today, I've been working on my 2023 roadmap.
Yeah.
So it's a great day to ask. Here's a routine thing that I did today. I actually worked on acknowledging first-time contributors.
Okay.
So it's a pretty large church. So we'll have, 10, 20, dozens. Just depends of first-time givers in a week.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let them know, hey, we got this. Thank you for taking this step. And I'll connect those people with their campus pastors.
Yeah.
That's a routine thing that I do each week. Today,
pause on that real quick. Can you pause on that real quick? Because I think that that little thing is like so meaningful, and any church of any size can do it, whether you have a stewardship pastor or not, right? Like you can first time givers, or maybe somebody who increased their gift, or maybe somebody who set up like a recurring gift. Like there's kind of different forms of that. Like they're taking some step financially that you notice and you want to appreciate or acknowledge them, like it's between them and God, right? It's a spiritual thing, but it is nice to be appreciated. So why do you do that, and how do you do it?
I have a list that I run. I use a couple different things for analytics. Our church uses Ministry Platform, and I use some combination of that and Mortarstone, which is a third-party data analytics company. So I'll run a list each week. I look at it to see if anything looks strange or whatever. I'm looking for contributions to certain budget categories, not like I'm going on a missions trip, so I gave to the missions trip that I'm going on.
Right.
I have letters that we produce in-house, and they have the pastor's pre-printed signature on them. They go out, and then I let the pastor know. I'm like, hey, these people gave for the first time. Make sure they're on your radar.
Mm-hmm.
And when they give for the second and third time, I know I'm not talking about amounts, and these are not calls for like fundraising or development, but when somebody starts to develop a giving habit, I'll let other people on the church teams know. Because if somebody's given for the third time, like that might be a person that would be good for a membership class or a volunteer opportunity. Right. We might want to know, have they been baptized? Somebody might drop a gift one time because they came for their friend's kid's choir performance.
Right.
But they don't go three times without. 3 times is an expression of some level of commitment.
Right.
And I want to make sure we're helping them move forward.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
Some of that's Ministry Platform, some of it's Mortarstone.
Yeah. Okay. Love it. All right. I interrupted. So that's kind of a thing you do every day or weekly.
Yep. And then as I'm looking at my 2023 roadmap, a big emphasis for me this year is going to be equipping our staff teams. It turns out that not everybody has that Enneagram 8, and not everybody is real comfortable having stewardship conversations. And a lot of times that is simply because of a lack of understanding about stewardship and generosity.
Right.
So and again, equipping 8 campuses we have a couple hundred people. This is going to take a while. So this year, that'll be a focus. I have a focus this year also on working with the worship teams at each of our campuses and equipping the staff to work with their volunteers, which are the core of any church.
Right.
So my goal is to equip our staff teams so they can start to have giving conversations and challenge the people that volunteer in their ministries with in the areas of giving and stewardship.
Yeah. How do you help them do that? Like, what's the rhythm of, because I'm assuming you guys on Sundays have sort of an offering moment, maybe every Sunday. Every church is kind of different, but it's pretty common for most churches on Sunday to have sort of the offering moment. People give, and that's like the one way giving happens in a church. Like beyond that, or maybe that's part of it, but how are you helping them have these conversations or make it a part of what they do as pastors?
I'll let you know at the end of 2023.
Okay.
But I'll tell you how this is working right now. So let's say one of our campuses that they're most engaged in this, and a lot of this tends to be which staff are passionate about. There's normally a reason for that. So this is kind of like my campus where they're killing it. And so they have a kids minister there who she says, can I start to share some of this content in my volunteer huddles? So every week before church starts, they do a huddle of their kids ministry volunteers.
Yeah.
They do a little devotional. She wants to do a generosity devotional. Now, I, of course, told her, please do that. If you want somebody to do it for you, I'll come do it. So I'm looking for the places where we're interacting with leaders and the stewardship message can come from the person that's leading that team. Because in that particular instance, that young woman has more of a voice with those people, even than their campus pastor. And certainly more of a voice than me because I don't know any of them.
Right.
So I'm challenging her to do that. And with that, we're actually doing a couple other things with that ministry that I'm pretty excited about that have to do with how we talk to parents about stewardship and key moments in the lives of their kids.
Right.
So yeah, so if the worship team is gathering for some kind of training, I want the worship leader to talk about stewardship. I don't need to be there.
Right.
They don't know me.
Equipping them to, do you, like, when it comes to giving at Brentwood, do you guys do offering moment every Sunday? Every campus does one. Do you get involved in helping coach or train or any parts about how to take up a great offering?
Yeah, I spent at least an hour or two today giving feedback on some of the things we're doing with that.
Yeah.
I write bullet points for a lot of that stuff. Our multi-campus structure, probably most of the churches Tithely serves are not multi-campus just because most churches are single campus. But our campuses work very independently from each other. So I try to create broad strokes. And we have a very good script that we're good at, which is, I call it the BYG script. It's the Because You Give script. And this is kind of a level 1 script that almost any generosity coach would tell you to do. Don't just collect an offering, show the results and the impact of what you're giving to. And Brentwood has been great at this script for years. And that script can be changed up and improved because what I know and what you know, everybody listening on your podcast may or may not know, is that there's a lot of people that just don't give.
Yeah.
So if you're,
it's
crazy, right?
Yeah.
So let me ask this question. If you're in front of a church and week after week, you see these great things that are happening and the message you hear is because you give, but you're not a person that gives, what are you hearing really?
Yeah.
You're not hearing a challenge to give, and you're hearing secondarily, all these great things are happening and they're doing it without my money. So I can just use my money for me. Like they clearly don't need my money to do that cool thing.
Right.
I'm glad somebody else is giving. So those are the kinds of things when I'm coaching a campus pastor or anybody on the team that's going to be on the stage. Like, hey, remember, there are 3 or 4 different groups of people in your audience. It's not homogenous when it comes to giving. So let's just understand that, tailor your message, make sure you call out who it is that you're speaking to.
And how do you get those people that aren't giving to give? Like, it's shocking. And I've seen this in all kinds of ways, right? You might have a church of 1,000 and, 100 families are the ones doing all the giving.
Yeah.
Like percentage wise. Now I know some of it's just based on, as you get older, you make more money and that kind of thing. So that makes a lot of sense. But then you get this big group of people that are giving like 0. They're not even participating in giving. And they're like regular, they're there all the time. They're part of the church and it, they know, and they don't give.
Yeah. So I mean, programmatically, there's no answer to that question, and that's not the $1 million question. That question's worth billions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So here's where I've had success with that. I like 90-day tithing challenges that are executed well.
Yeah.
Have you worked with churches that do that?
I mean, I've heard of them. I've never been a part of something and like seen it in action, but I have
Yeah.
heard of it plenty.
So it's pretty cool. I mean, you ask people, hey, I want you to commit for 90 days to tithe. You define what a tithe is. And what you tell them is, hey, listen, if at the end of that time you don't think that you should have done that or you want your money back, we'll give you your money back. So for any financial administrators listening, don't start this in November because then it'll go over a calendar year.
Yeah.
And your accounting will get all confused. But start it in January. Start it at a time when it's a season of renewal in your church. And somebody will ask for money back. I've never had that happen. But you personally have never known somebody that tithed that regretted it. Like you've never met a guy who's 80 years old and says, I tithe my whole life.
Right.
And boy, am I sorry that I did that.
Right.
So that's one way. But I find the bigger way is the same way we grow when you were discipled, whatever context brought you along in your spiritual maturity works for giving as well. So whether that's a one-on-one relationship or a powerful, tailored small group experience, that's where I think the magic happens.
Right. Yeah.
If you put me with somebody who doesn't give and we talk, he may not be being disobedient. He may be being ignorant. After we talk, he has an opportunity to be obedient, but he can no longer be ignorant.
Right. Yeah.
So I want to challenge him. I used to work for Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey would say, put the cookies on the bottom shelf. What does it look like? Calculate a tithe. How would you do that? What would it look like? How much money could you give away over the course of your life if you made it a priority?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've talked to quite a few great churches where, training their leaders and their volunteer leaders or small group leaders and having the giving and generosity talks in the small group environment and being asking people into the practice of giving was like a massive part of how they improved that, how they got people by just by asking, right? Like inviting people into it versus it just being kind of from stage or big on a Sunday, but having more of a personal ask into whatever it might be. Giving being one thing, but it could be attending a small group. It could be serving in kids ministry, but like being asked has a big impact. I've heard that a few times with different churches that's kind of the approach they take to it.
One of my big takeaways after about my first year here at Brentwood, we did a minister's retreat and they asked me to speak at it. It's about 90 people there. And I did a trick that I'd learned at Ramsey Solutions during my time there, which was I created a laboratory environment for people to experience generosity. How it works is everybody in the room gets $3 in an envelope. They don't know what's in it until you tell them to open it. And as an exercise, you play some fun music and have them walk around and give it away to each other.
Yeah.
They can't refuse a gift. They can't immediately reciprocate, and everybody has to, and you can give as much or as little as you want. And people just have an absolute blast doing this. And I use it to communicate a spiritual truth, which I think people miss all the time. And that's found in Acts 20:35, where it says it's more blessed to give than to receive. Mm-hmm. And in churches especially, even that because you give message, we are constantly talking about the receiver, not the giver. But Scripture tells us the giver is the more blessed of those parties. Mm. And if you make it fun, you can create those kind of environments and interactions. People really respond, and at the end they keep the money, and that always freaks them out.
Yeah,
like they're like, "Wait, I can keep that?"
Right.
So you mix $100 bill in there. You make it kind of fun.
Yeah, I love that. So when should a church start thinking about like having a stewardship pastor?
A church should think about stewardship all the time.
Yeah,
having a pastor on staff. I have a good friend who believes that in every church there is somebody for whom that is their passion. And he said, and then that person needs to be at the Christian Stewardship Network or leading the financial peace class or whatever.
Right.
So I think it's never wrong to think about having a champion. When you get to about 1,000 people, then you're going to want to, I think somebody needs to start owning that from a discipleship perspective.
Right.
I'm not sure. Is your question size or season?
It's really, it's open-ended, like kind of when is the right time to, think about it, when is it like kind of the senior pastor's role, like I assume size is part of the answer here, right? Like you need to be of a certain size because you're probably staffing up small groups and kids ministry and worship and other things first. But I just don't think that a lot of churches think about like the pastoral side of like stewardship and having somebody who's really thinking about it. Like, so it just gets kind of left to the side, or maybe they've never even thought about having a person on staff that does it. Even maybe if it's a part-time person, or maybe to your point, it's a volunteer leader who has a passion for it and is good at it and isn't on staff, but they help in that way. So just trying to give people a sense of how to think about that.
I think there's a wrong time. That might be a different way to talk about it. So the wrong time is when you're behind in budget. And so if you're looking for stewardship to solve your revenue problem because you've made a bunch of dumb decisions, or we won't go with dumb, we'll go with unfortunate decisions you wish you could redo. Like people know that. Like and that's when I talk about the motives of money, people instinctively know that. So I think it's the same thing with, when you wait till you're behind in budget to preach your annual stewardship message or series, it's a little transparent. I would rather look at those things when we're doing well,
right?
When we're asking people to grow in giving, when we don't need the money,
right?
That's a different way to answer that.
Yeah, I love that. Maybe for a second here before we wrap up, how are you, in this current like economic environment, like inflation and recession and markets are down and all the things, just all the stuff is happening. Everyone's aware of it. Everyone's feeling it. Like, how are you addressing that or working through that as a church? Like, how are you thinking about it as the stewardship pastor and helping the church do it?
We're aware of the perceived risk that comes with those things. In my work at Generis, our experience there tells us that in general, these seasons don't have the effect on the top line that you think they would. And so I would encourage churches with that. It's not that there's no effect, but I mean, when COVID started, giving went up.
Right. Shockingly. Right.
Yeah. Well, maybe, but maybe not. And so I'd say there is a tremendous spiritual opportunity in these times. So I was thinking just recently about Joseph and 7 years of famine. So, I mean, these situations are not exactly analogous, but when times are uncertain, my opinion is when times are uncertain, it's the time to double down on a stewardship message and on a generosity message. Because if you look at how giving was done in the Old Testament, you're giving first fruits of agriculture or first fruits of cattle.
Right.
And the reason the first fruit was important was because you had to trust God that there would be a second fruit. And that principle applies when your 401k decreases in value, when your cryptocurrency tanks, when the thing that you thought was going to be great, isn't great.
Yeah.
So this is a time. This is the best time for a stewardship message.
Yeah. I mean, I love it. It's a tricky little season though, and I imagine the pastors, church leaders that already struggle with talking about finances or giving, like makes it even more challenging, because you're just feeling what your people feel. And it's a tricky dynamic.
But money reveals what we do with money reveals the true direction and inclination of our heart.
Yeah.
And so when you think about like all the work that I did with Ramsey, or any time I'm working with somebody to get them out of debt, my question for that person is often not what's the plan to get out of debt. That's just math and behavior. What are the attitudes and beliefs that put you in that position in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And this to me, that's the bigger conversation. It's not just about the money. It's about what the money reveals. Why is it that you thought you needed a $50,000 automobile and a $40,000 a year teacher salary? Why did you do that?
Right.
Like, I want to understand that. And this season, when people are talking and thinking about money, that's a great time to lead them to a better place.
Yeah. To bring it up and dive into it. Yeah. Right.
I'm a stewardship guy, so every time's a great time.
It's always a good.
So there's no bad time for stewardship.
Okay, since we are at also end of year, I got a few rapid fire questions, but I got one more just related to sort of end of year giving. What do you guys do at Brentwood? End of year giving. People are giving for all kinds of reasons, but you get people that maybe they get bonuses at the end of the year, or the way their jobs are, like things are sort of up and down all year, and they give a bunch more at the end of the year. In the US, people give for tax reasons. That doesn't make them not generous. It's just a smart thing to do.
The reality.
You get all the things going on. And also kind of piggybacking on that is you get into tax season, early part of next year. I'd love to know what you guys do for end of year giving, if anything, and then how you follow up during tax season on the previous year's giving.
Yeah. Well, we are for end of year giving. We're big fans.
Yeah.
A significant percentage of our budget actually is allocated to come in December, because historically that's where we are. Brentwood, if you don't know this area of Middle Tennessee, kind of like Orange County.
Okay.
I mean, if you're a millionaire in Williamson County, you're average.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of so we have a lot of corporate jobs, a lot of healthcare, a lot of finance jobs. So people do the exact situation you described. I had in my office yesterday. A guy came in with a check that would be more than many churches' annual budget. It's kind of neat. This year, my push has been to help our folks understand that we have non-cash ways to give. So I'm training our campus pastors to mention, not to know the deep details, but to mention stock giving, to mention QCDs from IRAs,
right?
To let people know we can take cryptocurrency. Although this particular day, whatever cryptocurrency you own, it's probably not ahead.
That would have been great last year, but
would have been great last year. Actually, I heard some crazy statistics on that. I'm not a crypto guy, but I bought some just to test out our solution. So I bought $100, donated $50, and immediately lost money on the rest. So that's my don't take boutique investing tips from me. So that's what we're doing. And then we have I work on following up with our kind of not our asset-based givers in a different way than our cash-based givers. Right. But all that kind of rolls up under our donor communication. I'm not sure that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering do you guys do anything where you talk about end of year giving, or like from stage you kind of mention?
We do, and actually I have a mailer going out. This is being recorded the 14th of December. I don't know when you're putting it on, but I have a mailer that goes out this week, an actual physical mailer, which apparently nobody does anymore. But people will see that. I mean, the average church member here probably gets a couple emails a week, but they don't get any mail.
Right.
So they will see it. And on that are all the different ways to give.
Yeah.
And so for many of them, I think a lot of times the effect of that is actually that next year they'll know better how to do it. And they'll know, oh, wait, Brentwood Baptist has a way for me to do my will.
Right.
And they can come online and do their will. As with many things, messaging is not once. Drips are better than fire hoses. Mm-hmm. So I just try to get those words. I want people to see the word IRA. I want them to see the word stock, crypto,
right, as new ways to do it. And then you guys throughout December kind of talking about end of year giving somehow, some way in the
our message this year is finish well, start strong, because we're in a capital campaign. Some of the normal targeted funds we might do, we're not doing those,
right?
So we're encouraging people to hit up to fulfill their campaign pledges.
Their campaign,
and another year that might be different. Sometimes we've done special offerings. I'm working with a church in North Carolina right now that they wanted to do their first ever Christmas offering. And so we work on messaging specific to that thing,
Right.
and the language becomes different.
Right.
So it just depends on your season.
Yeah, I love it. And then tax season, when you get into that, do you guys do anything special in the kind of like, when you're sending out people's full year tax receipts and that kind of thing? Do you have, extra messaging that you put in? Do you?
There's always messaging, and we don't wait till tax season to do it because we do that quarterly.
Okay.
So we send out a statement quarterly.
Quarterly statement.
And I'm always trying to highlight at least one thing in there. Again, knowing most people don't look at, you've been in a church office, so you know that like on April 13th.
Yeah, it's wild.
Everybody calls it. This is what they say. You didn't send my tax statement, which is A, too late, and B, just not true. Right. You did send it. Yeah. What they mean is they lost it. So, which is fine. We love them. But like every opportunity, we're thanking somebody for a gift. We're dripping, whether it's in something new we're offering, crypto, the will kind of thing. I'm a fan of National Christian Foundation. I like their boutique stuff, especially if you're serving people that do like private equity or building and selling companies. There's some specialized things. Only one person in your congregation needs to know about that, but he needs to know.
Right. Yeah, love it. All right, a couple rapid fire questions and we'll wrap it up. Hold
on.
Oh yeah, get a drink.
Let's go.
Who's a church leader that you have looked up to? It could be, someone you've known or someone you know from afar, but just a leader that you've looked up to, inspired you, mentored you over the years.
Dave Briggs, who is one of the driving forces behind the Christian Stewardship Network, is the stewardship pastor at Central Christian in Mesa, Arizona, and previously served Willow Creek in its heyday. He built he's real instrumental in building their stewardship ministry there. That guy is a thinker about all things stewardship. He is wise and godly, and if I could be like him, I would consider my life a win.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
If you're ever around that guy, you should buy him lunch.
Just soak it in.
Just soak it up. Yeah, for sure.
Love it. Well, how about a book that you've read that you think everyone should read?
The Principle of the Path, Andy Stanley.
Principle of the Path?
The Principle of the Path by Andy Stanley. I have given away maybe 100, maybe 200 copies of that book. And of all the books I've read in the last 15 years, that has been the single most influential. I buy it for the seniors at my kids' school every year.
That's
awesome. Give them all a copy.
Very cool. Podcast that you're listening to right now?
I am a huge I'm a Pushkin Plus subscriber, which is Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah.
Revisionist History. And then there's Cautionary Tales. And then they mix in all these other kind of random ones. And so what I like about them, they're very well crafted, and sometimes their bias is just kind of outside of where I would be, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And it challenges me. But right now, for the third time, I'm listening to Andy Weir's audiobook Hail Mary.
Nice.
He's the guy that wrote The Martian, and so I've got a little bit of range.
Yeah, you got some good ones in there. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, this has been great. Where can folks, I'm assuming they can go to BrentwoodBaptist.com.
No, they don't find me there. I'm not there.
You're not there.
Our campus structure is such, since I don't serve one campus and all our campuses have separate websites.
Okay.
That I'm not there. But if you go to the team page at generis.com, you'll find me.
Okay.
If you come to the Christian Stewardship Network, and later this year, you can find me. That's christianstewardshipnetwork.com. I'm just a huge fan of that organization. I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn, although I'm not a big social media guy. If somebody messages me, I usually try to get back.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, this has been great, man. Thank you for taking some time to be on the show.
Cool, man. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. And thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you next week on another episode of Modern Church Leader. Bye-bye.
Cheers.